My name is Ashley Biggs. I graduated 2008 from Loyola with a double major in sociology and psychology. And so while I was at Loyola, I worked a lot with CCSJ. I was a service coordinator for a lot of homelessness programs. And I did some traveling. I did the Jamaican experience twice. I actually went on the first trip that they ever had. And then I led the second one. And I also went on spring break outreach. So I got to be exposed to a lot of different things that touch sociology and kind of what I do now, actually, while I was at Loyola. Before you all got on, we were talking about what our internships were, and mine was actually based at a transitional housing program for women and children. And so I went straight from Loyola to University of Maryland to get my master's in social work. And so my original plan was that I was going to be a community organizer, which I am not, and work in homelessness and housing issues, which I do. So part of it worked out. But when I got to the MSW program, I was exposed to the program with the state called Title 4E. And so how that works is you agree to work in foster care for your second year internship, and the state pays your tuition, and then you work for them afterwards. So since I ended up deciding to go the clinical route instead of the management and community organizing route, I did that program. And so I worked for the state for 3 years, I guess. I did 2 years in foster care and 1 year in child protective services in sexual abuse investigations. And then I moved on to actually go back to kind of housing had always called me. So I worked for the mayor's office of homeless services for a while, doing grant compliance, and then decided I'd kind of had enough of city life and wanted to come back to where my family was. So I moved back to New Jersey. And when I came back to New Jersey, I was looking for a job, kind of really focusing on housing issues. And so I started working for the local Habitat for Humanity. I worked for them for 9 months on a short-term contract position. So they were wrapping up all of their Sandy work still, like 10 years later, 3 years later. They're still working on it now, but it was about 3 years later at the time, I guess, now that I'm doing the math. And so I wrapped up their grants, and I really liked the Habitat program. It addressed the housing issues that I was always passionate about, and I wanted to continue working for Habitat, but the Habitat that I was working for didn't have any openings. So I applied to the Habitat in the next county and was actually hired to be the volunteer coordinator, which was full circle back to my service coordinator days with CCSJ. And so I was a volunteer coordinator for a while. I ran what they call their travel with a purpose trips. So we not only take volunteers on our sites, but we also send them abroad to other countries and to places that have been hit by natural disaster. So New Orleans, Texas, places like that. So I've been there for about 6 years now, and I am now actually the chief of staff at the organization. So I worked my way up from volunteer engagement and then to grants management and then now to administration. So that's what I do now, as well as I do communications actually for local government, because my experience working for the mayor's office and the transferable skills, I think, of psychology and sociology and communication have enabled me to do that. So I do their website and their social media. So I was made chief of staff in January of 2020. So about 2 months before COVID hit. So I was learning an entire new position, but then also have been navigating COVID world for the past 2 years. So it's definitely been an interesting experience and has definitely shaped what we do day in and day out. I'm a Zoom expert at this point, as I'm sure all of you are, but we build typically around 8 to 12 houses a year. During COVID, we actually completed 17 houses, which was really awesome, but it's been a lot of hard work, and we have been very affected in every way that we do business by COVID. So supply chain, we couldn't have volunteers for a long time. Our families couldn't do their sweat equity hours. They couldn't come into the office. they couldn't process their paperwork with us. So we had to get really innovative in how we do business, which we've been able to do. We've been lucky for that. But I think the biggest thing that I would say, if you're looking at a career path in sociology, is that there's so many options. You shouldn't decide on one thing and think that that's like the one thing you're going to do, like I had in my mind, because it turned out to be completely different. And you can change and you can do different things in different capacities. And there's just so many options, and your skills are very transferable. So I would encourage you to experience lots of different things before you kind of settle on the path you want to go down, which I think I have found at this point, but that is about 14 years later. So it took some time and some changes and kind of experimenting in different arenas, but I did ultimately round back to housing and round back to kind of management and programming and operations, which I really like. Like I said, I worked in foster care and child protective services for a while. And for me, the clinical route and the one-on-one with families was just too taxing emotionally over time for me. So plenty of people are very good at it. It was not the place I needed to land. So tried out different things until I found the right spot.
Could you say a little bit more about how you use sociology in your daily life at work?
Sure, absolutely. So Habitat for Humanity, people might be familiar with, not sure the level of. So real Cliff Notes version is that we build affordable homeownership opportunities. So we, at least my habitat, most habitats build in places that don't typically offer homeownership opportunities. So whether that's in an urban area where homeownership is typically really low, or in a suburban area where certain people are priced out of being homeowners. And so we really try in how we make decisions about programming and working with families and where we're going to build, look at all the different aspects of what the needs are for a family or a community and how to address those. And especially recently, we've gotten into doing a lot of work around racial equity. So studying a lot about how the housing market has been very unfavorable to very many people and trying to start to right some of those wrongs.
I had a question for Ashley. I was curious, when you mentioned like CPS, that piqued my interest. So out of curiosity, like what are the qualifications of that? Because I know that some state employed like jobs, you can just go in with like the level of training that they give you. But I was curious like if it was that way or if there was some other like higher level like academic like college qualifications with your major or whatnot.
Yeah, so I can only speak for the Maryland system because that's the only system that I worked in. It's, in my personal opinion, a little bit flawed. Yes, you can enter into the foster care child protective system with a bachelor's in just about anything, or you and go through their training, or you can enter in with a master's in just about anything and go through their training, or you can enter in with a master's in social work and go through their training. Really, the only difference in the actual work that you get at that level is how much you get paid. You literally get the same cases as anybody else would get, which I think is a disservice to the families and children. And that's just my personal opinion, but having worked there for a few years, that is my opinion. Once you have a master's in social work, you can go ahead and get your license. Once you get your license, you can get promoted to supervisor. So that's really the difference in the career path in that arena. But yes, you can, I think if you have a bachelor's in psychology and sociology, a master's in those fields, you would be best suited to go into that field. But I do think it is a little bit flawed in how they assign workers to families, because your background might not make you the most equipped to help a family, and sometimes in certain cases it can be more harm than good.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Mackenzie wrote, Ashley and Dominic, how did you decide to go to grad school right away? And how did you decide where?
So similar to Dominic and Sierra, I do not like school. So I decided to go straight through because I figured if I didn't go straight through, I wouldn't go back. And so I'm glad I did, partially to get it over with, but also partially because I think it was the best way to serve the families that I was working with. And in hindsight, and I also said I would never go back to school, but then I made a liar out of myself because I did go back to school and got a certificate in nonprofit management. And so I think for me, the reason was to get it over with, quite frankly. But if you think it was a good thing that I did it that way. I wanted to stay in the Baltimore community. I invested a lot of my time and passion in the Baltimore community while I was at Loyola. And so I felt I really wanted to stay there. So I only applied to University of Maryland. And if I hadn't gotten in, I would have stayed and worked in the area. And so that's how I decided to go that route.
Lily writes, my aspirations include mental health counseling too. I plan on going to graduate school in a year or two. Before then, I'd like to gain field experience. What do you suggest, since I will be competing with others who have higher degrees? How do I tap into the counseling aspect rather than the research or casework?
I don't know, Sarah, if you would completely agree, but I do think that casework is a good entryway to seeing if counseling is kind of really a path you might want to go down. It's like, you're not doing counseling, obviously, and casework is different, but there are some aspects of overlap. And so that's a good way, I personally think, to expose yourself to figuring out if working in that one-on-one setting with people is something you'd be interested in.
So Rixie's asking, have you guys ever doubted or regretted majoring in sociology? Do you think there could have been another path or major for you?
I don't regret it now. I will be completely honest and say there have been times that I have regretted it, but it was usually because I didn't find myself in the best working environment, or I wasn't in the right position for me. And so I think if you're passionate about it, you're probably on the right path. But there's, like I've said a couple of times, so many options in how you can use it, and you have to find the right one for you. And so, there might be periods of regret, but they didn't stick around, so don't worry.
Yeah. Ashley, you were talking about how when you were in grad school, can you just go over you had to work in foster care for 2 years or something? Can you just go over that again?
Sure. So when I first entered you can do this Title IV program, which is unique to Maryland, so I can't speak for any other states if they have similar or not, but you can do it for 2 years or one. I did it only for my second year. So my first year, I was actually placed in a community resource center in West Baltimore. And so I just did some basic casework, referrals, helping people with their resumes, working on programming, stuff like that. And then I found out about the Title IV program during my first year, and really enjoyed working with children and families. So decided to go that route. So how that worked for me, and just doing the program in my second year, was that my 3-day-a-week internship was actually in foster care in a unit, and with other students, which is great. And we had a worker assigned to our unit, and a unit, I forget what the title was, but like a head of the unit, and one other person that worked with us, and they were all MSWs too. So you were really getting that quality training through that program. And so some of my coursework had to do with families and children. And then, so for every year you took tuition, you had to work for a year. So I had to work for 1 year, but I actually ended up working in foster care for 2, and then working in child protective services for 1. So that's kind of how that program works. Are there specific questions or just kind of overview?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the overview.
Sure. It was a really good experience.
I was just going to ask, what would you tell your senior self? So if you could go back in time, think back to when you were seniors and you were getting ready to figure out what was next, what would you tell yourself at that point in time?
Didn't know as much as I thought I did about anything, but the world in particular, my career path, Dr. Van's laughing at me. I thought I knew a lot. And you're always learning and you're always growing and you're always changing. And I think that's the beauty of a career in this area is the human race is always changing and people are always changing, the communities are always changing, and you can grow and learn with them and really do some good in the world if you are open to being open to learning and changing. And I think on that same line, Sarah, the skills and the knowledge is really transferable to a lot of different things that you wouldn't think it is. And so if you are really enjoyed the classwork or you're not sure of your next step, like even just trying something, whether it's a part-time job or a job you didn't think would be your next step, there's something to be learned from every experience. And so, as I said before, to just kind of be open to whatever might be next.
So Mackenzie has asked, Ashley, do you think you could have gotten to your current position without going to grad school?
I think anything is possible. There are people that I work with that have a bachelor's degree and are higher than me in the organization. There are people I work with that don't have any undergrad experience and do a really amazing job because of the experience that they have. So I think anything is possible. I do think it helps, I think getting that additional education and learning about the field on a higher level definitely accelerated my path to where I am now.